event at Bruegel on the EU neighborhood and the help that might be needed in the neighborhood to come over the COVID-19 epidemic crisis. I am delighted and really honored to host a very distinguished panel today. We have Oliver Vahey, who is the European Commissioner for Neighborhood and Enlargement. Welcome, Commissioner. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And the President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Sarma Chakrabarti. Welcome, President. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be with you.
Absolutely. So if I may jump immediately to the discussion on the neighborhood, and I think the EU reaction to the pandemic when it first broke out was very introvert, and part of it is justified. Human nature turns very defensive when it's under extreme stress, but very quickly the EU understood that this isn't either sustainable or indeed the right thing to do to solve the pandemic, and it turned out it enhances look for solutions that are probably more cooperative solutions, but solutions that can really help manage a crisis that's really truly global. So with a focus to the EU and the neighborhood of the EU, if I may start with you, Commissioner, would it be possible for you to outline to us, also for the benefit of our audience, what is the European Commission doing to support the containment of the pandemic crisis in the EU's doorstep, but also manage the economic fallout that is inevitable?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I do agree with you that maybe at the beginning of the crisis, basically in the first week or two, we have been introverted. But you need to know that, of course, this crisis has hit all the member states at the same time, maybe to different levels. But I think some definition had to be, or redefinition had to be done in terms of how we can actually help the people on the ground, be it in the member states or in our neighborhood. So if you look back in time, by now we're talking about events that has happened 2 months ago. So we have a bit of a perspective already. Is that we came out in the neighborhood already a week later than with the internal measures. Now, our priority was to bring help to the region, because our assessment is that we are sharing the continent with a vast number of the neighboring countries. So we are talking about the Eastern Partnership countries, and we're talking about the Western Balkans. But we also have, of course, clear responsibility when it comes to the southern neighborhood. So our plan was to reach out to all the regions, which we did, and ask them what their immediate needs were. We have divided up the work in three, and strategy in three strands. First, to handle the immediate needs, and those were needs that have been assessed either by the countries in question. This is what happened mostly in the Western Balkans. And in the Eastern Partnership countries, we also had the help of the WHO to provide us with the needs assessment. In the southern neighborhood, we have also been relying on WHO. Now, what we got back was that, of course, just like our member states as well, they have been missing the very basic equipment to fight the crisis. So ventilators, personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, goggles. By now this is known, but back then we really had to act rapidly to be able to deploy the help. So my priority was to mobilize the funds that we have. We are at the end of the MFF, as you know, the 7-year financial period. So we had very little funds with which we could help. But we have redeployed and mobilized all the funds that we have had back then still available. Also, we have asked our partners, international financial institutions like the EBRD, to help us to redeploy all the funds that are still available to fight the crisis. So first, we came out with funds for all the different regions. If you look at, for instance, the Balkans, we really deployed immediately within a week 38 million euros, and we have financed immediately the equipment to land there. In some cases, actually, we have been financing the arrival of the equipment they have been purchasing elsewhere. We have financed over 12 long-haul flights to the Western Balkans, bringing in 750 million tons of equipment. So that was the first part of handling the crisis. The second, of course, is the time that we're living now, which is not so much the immediate needs, but the urgent needs. Mainly establishing the equipment they need and the infrastructure they need to fight the health crisis and to be able to continue to cope with the challenges the health crisis brings. So we're talking about intensive care units, we're talking about ambulances, we're talking about basically healthcare infrastructure to help them to fight the crisis. This is the phase in which we are now, and for that we've been deploying quite a substantial amount. Altogether, we're deploying 450 million euros to the Western Balkans, and out of that, it's more than 150 million euros going only for this leg of the crisis management. And the third part will be, of course, handling the economic crisis that comes after the health crisis. And there we have found that what we need is liquidity. So we have deployed loans and credits to the financial institutions so that liquidity is ensured regionally. This is true for all three neighborhoods. And we're looking at possibilities of contributing and financing SMEs so that people do not lose their jobs, and the SMEs will continue to be able to employ these people. And we will have, we can cushion somehow the unemployment challenge crisis brings. And the third part was also very important, is that we have been providing macrofinancial assistance in all the neighborhoods, those countries where macrofinancial systems have been failing or were very close to failing. This is how we have managed to provide assistance to Tunisia. We've been providing assistance to Lebanon, Jordan, but also to Ukraine, Moldavia, Georgia, or if you look at the Western Balkans. I don't see you anymore. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, we are following you very well. Thank you.
Okay, good. Sorry, because there's an interruption on my screen. Apart from Serbia, basically each and every single country in the Western Balkan has received such help. So if I want to go with the grand total in terms of help that we are deploying, what I can give you is that we are deploying 3.3 billion euros to the region that they can use to fight the crisis at hand, including, of course, the economic crisis that comes, unfortunately, with it. Now, of course, this is only the immediate part of all the crisis management, because we will have to also come up with plans, as we have been tasked by the European Council just last week, for the economic recovery and the economic development for the Western Balkans. We are planning to do the same when we will have the new MFF agreed by the member states, also for the southern neighborhood. And you may have seen our communication on the Eastern Partnership, where again building the economy is the priority. So all this would have to be followed up very tediously later on during the year. We are already sitting together with all the partners and also with all the countries to assess their needs. And I'm happy to tell you that today this is already the second part of my day with with the EBRD. We just had a little meeting this morning with the president, with President Chakrabarti, and we have already started to design how we could start the economic rebuilding, but also the economic development, because it's not enough to rebuild what we have had, but our original plan was to boost the local economy and to build a resilient, strong market economy throughout the Western Balkans. Maybe I stop here and I
if I may actually bring if you allow me, Commissioner, to bring also President Chakrabarti, just for the benefit of our audience, the 3.3 billion that you mentioned as the total sum of the financial support is also jointly with the European Investment Bank for the benefit of the region. President Chakrabarti, if I may come to you, the BRD was very quick to respond. By mid-March, you had something that was called the solidarity package, putting out a lot of effort to try and re-help the region. Can you tell us what does it consist of and what is the ultimate objective here?
Sure. Thank you very much, Maria. And it's nice to be on this with my friend Oliver as well. I think, first of all, to say that, one of the reasons why I think EBRD could respond so quickly is because of our business model, which has a large number of offices on the ground. So we get this market intelligence of what is actually happening in these countries of operation very, very quickly. So yes, we were the first multilateral out of the block. We could see straight away that supply chains have been disrupted, tourism revenues were going to be, down in a big way. Remittances are going to be down, of course, on top of the health impacts as well. And for some of our countries of operation, commodity prices, oil price, and others, so the all sort of difficult weather arriving at the same time. So we put together this, what we call a solidarity package. We've had our board approve now 2 phases of this, firstly on 13th of March, first multilateral out of the blocks, and then again on 23rd of April. And this essentially has 5 response channels, I would say. First of all, what we call a resilience framework. This is really important for short-term liquidity for EBRD's clients across the neighborhood and beyond as well. Why is this important? Because these clients became our clients because we actually believe in their businesses. We think they're sound going concerns, but they're suffering a liquidity crunch clearly right now. And we want to help them through that crunch with this short-term liquidity in particular. The second area was trade finance. Because of the disruption to global trade, we really had to push very hard on trade finance to facilitate that. And we've had 2 record months in a row. The highest 2 months ever in EBRD's history in terms of trade finance has been March and April of this year. And then the third channel, if you like, is helping with fast tracking, I would say, payment deferrals, restructurings of those clients that are actually in distress now because of the economic situation. We think this sort of approach will help them survive this crisis. Fourthly, we're trying to get more money, particularly to the SMEs and to corporate clients, through the local banking systems, financial intermediaries as well, and making sure they do lend. It's very, very important here. And again, Oliver and I were discussing this morning, the importance of not just providing the financing to the local banks, but making sure that it leaves the local banks into the real economy and doesn't stay in the local banks. So we have to make sure that happens between the Commission and EBRD as well. And the fifth response channel is we call vital infrastructure support. One of my colleagues has given this a very nice title, Keeping the Lights On, by which we mean really the sort of infrastructure services often at municipal level, which are challenged now because of the pressures on budgets, local budgets, central government budgets. And so we want to make sure there's enough liquidity in the infrastructure services at municipal level and other levels, state enterprises as well, to make sure they're still functioning. All in all, what we are saying is that if you take this year and 2021, this solidarity package will amount to 21 billion euros from the EBRD. I already think that we may actually go above that. We don't know. We've got the capital capacity to do that. So far, as of this morning, in fact, this year already 3 billion has been invested. So last year was a record for EBRD, 10 billion euros of investment. I'm pretty confident that the record will be bettered this year. We'll have to do more because of the crisis. And I think it's important, as the Commissioner was saying, to think of this as a, sort of spectrum of involvement. Firstly, it's about rescue. Secondly, it's about the restructuring. And thirdly, it's about recovery. So that 21 billion encompasses all three phases of what we're trying to do. And I should say it's not just about investment. It's really important in the engagement that EBRD continues its very strong engagement on policy issues with these countries of operations. So the Vienna Initiative, reactivation of that has been very, very important. But also, I think at local level, making sure the investment climate stays open, attractive to EU and other investors in these countries going forward as well. That's something we're also focusing on very much as well. And we've, you asked in your initial question about the cooperation. I think this can only work if institutions like EBRD cooperate really well with EU, with the Commission, with member states, with EIB, but with the World Bank and others as well. So there has to be a very good division of labor, but there's also got to be very, very good coordination. And I'm very proud actually that EBRD was at that meeting, or the Team Europe meeting, involving foreign affairs ministers in the development mode. That was a very good discussion and really happy to be part of that. And we've got plenty of work to do in each of the neighborhood regions to keep that coordination up, to actually leverage each other going forward.
Yeah. I really like, President Chakrabarty, your
we're having
of the spectrum of involvement, because of course all the emphasis right now is hello.
Yeah, we got you again. Yeah,
it's coming on and
yes
off.
Sorry, there is an internet connection. I was just saying that if you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I was just saying that I really like the way you put the spectrum of involvement and the role of big institutions in trying and be involved in all three legs of that spectrum. For the moment, the difference between the EU help there and the EBRD is quite startling, but the EU is very much about the first part. It is about, helping the liquidity provision, providing health facilities. And I think it would be important to also think about the recovery side, because the recovery is going to be protracted. It's something that is going to, require assistance from all sides. And it would be important to do it in such a way that it doesn't also jeopardize for a number of the neighborhood countries that are also candidate countries to become members of the EU. And this is what I would like to turn now. I'd like to turn to a subset of the neighborhood countries now that are also candidates to become members of the EU, Commissioner. And I think if I may turn back to you and try and understand. And also I see here that our audience is asking, a number of people are raising these questions. How has our reaction and our involvement in the COVID-19 help to these regions? How's this altering, or is it altering the dynamics of the relationship between the candidate countries and the EU? These are committed European countries, but there has been very slow reaction from the EU, possibly small, and we'll see how the involvement of the EU will be in later stages of that spectrum of involvement. But how do you think the dynamic is changing, and is this become better, or is it put at risk?
Well, I think that the help that we are providing has been very well received. Yes, at the beginning we heard some voices that maybe we have been slow in reaction, but in fact, we were the first among any of the international partners who have been providing support on the ground. So by now, if you look at the sheer figures of the equipment that we have provided, I can give you a very, very long list, and we still have equipment arriving. What we have received as message, especially if you look back at the Western Balkan Summit of last week, was a very positive one. And we have been told that we are the single biggest donor and helper for the entire region. So I think that we stood up to the challenge. I also think that our relationship with the Western Balkans came out stronger from this crisis, which is something very interesting. And not only in the Balkans, but also among the member states. We had very clear messages already back in April at the first video conference of the leaders when they started to talk about the recovery. And if you look back, one of the 4 priorities is the neighborhood. And we have been delivering on that, and it got confirmed last week very nicely by all the leaders of the Western Balkan countries, but also by the EU member states. To give you an idea, we are about to deliver over 1,000 ventilators to the region. We are delivering over 2 million masks to the region. As I told you, we are financing quite a number of flights, bringing equipment. We are financing quite a bit of personal protective equipment, ambulances, help that is there, physical support that is seen. You know, broad concept that we are bringing there. We are bringing there real help. And also, if I look at the economy, together with the EBRD, to which we are extremely grateful, because they were really fast to act, much faster than other partners, and they have been extremely result-oriented in providing financing to the local banks, because that was the other big concern that might face very quickly a financial crisis as well, which I think by now we have managed to avoid with the help of the IMF and with the help of the EBRD. And this is help that is visible for anyone in all the regions, I think.
If you allow me, Commissioner, to come back to this issue, a number of an interesting argument that is coming out, in particular, in the absence of a consistent strategy of the EU with respect to China, is that countries in the Western Balkans become very, I would say, vulnerable to soft power coming from countries outside the EU. And you know that we've seen at the beginning the term health diplomacy coming out. And that was something that that the EU perceived as actually an interference. I mean, do you think that there is a real danger of after the pandemic? And here I'm really would like to go back to this issue of how has the COVID-19 altered the dynamics between the EU and the prospect countries as a result of having foreign faraway countries interfering with or reacting much faster to the help. Do you think there is a danger here that the Balkan countries may be subject to prey, if I may use that term?
No, I have a completely different reading of the situation. First of all, if one provides help, it is about helping. It's not a race. It is about providing help that is meaningful, that is useful, and that is reliably delivered when the help is needed. And I think this is what we did. Now, I keep on hearing this argument about China. We have also been helping China back then, and China has been helping Europe. So I don't quite understand why do we need to antagonize this whole question. On the contrary, what I see again, and these are the messages that we have been hearing at the summit from the leaders of the Balkan themselves was that they feel much more involved with Europe now compared to, for instance, last October. They feel that our relationship came out stronger from this crisis. And as you know, this Commission has been investing very heavily in all efforts to strengthen the relationship with the Western Balkans from its first day in the office. And I think this shows by now, and the result is there, because we are the single biggest helper, if I may put it like that, in the region. But again, help is not a race. Help is help.
President Chakrabarti, can I bring you into this conversation? How do you see the dynamic relationship changing after COVID-19 between Western Balkans and the broader region?
So I'm firmly one of those people who believe that this crisis, this economic crisis caused by a health situation, is actually an opportunity for acceleration, not for slowing down. The summit, I attended the Western Balkans Summit last week, was very successful in that. And I think there is a reason for that, but not just because of the crisis, but because of the decisions that have been taken in recent weeks on the accession process with regard to North Macedonia and Albania. This has given an encouragement. So people are saying, let's not waste the crisis, let's use it as an opportunity to make progress on the very difficult issues that we all have to address together. And if you look at the Western Balkans region, I mean, the countries have had the good news about the accession process, but they've also suffered this disruption of global supply chains. Bosnia, Serbia and North Macedonia, their manufacturing bases have been hit because of that. You can imagine along the Adriatic coast, Albania, Montenegro, their tourism revenues have been hit. You can imagine Kosovo, Albania, Bosnia, heavily depend on remittances from within the EU and from the UK as well. They've all been hit. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's actually the region where I think we'll have our forecasts out tomorrow, so I won't reveal them, but I will say this much. It's the region where I think we could have one of the sharpest recoveries of all time, because the fundamentals are moving in the right direction. They're actually well managed at a macro level, which is good news. But there's also a lot of work going in between now the Commission and EBRD and others to try and really push ahead on some of the much needed investments and policy reforms going forward. I'm looking forward, for example, EBRD playing a very strong role in the EU's investment plan, which will come out, I think, in the autumn. Commissioner and I have been discussing both the hard and soft connectivity side of what EBRD could do. And the hard connectivity, the cross-border projects that need financing, that have been waiting around for a while, that really need, with its railways or roads, energy connections as well. We need to help this region move away from its dependence on coal. And that is very important for the Green Deal and for just transition aspects too. But we also need to help this region move towards a more digital future, a soft connectivity future, and also a region that could do much more institutionally across countries. We are seeing some elements of that, chambers of commerce and regional electricity markets. These are developing, and these institutions are supported by EBRD, but there's a lot more to do still. One has to remember, Serbia apart, this region has a number of smallish to medium-sized economies. So the way an investor looks at them is to try and think of them together. Hence the emphasis by both the Commission and EBRD on cross-border, joined-up work on both the investment and policy side. So I actually think there's a huge amount that can be done. We're actually projecting to invest 1.7 billion euros this year in the Western Balkans. That's a 30% increase on last year's record numbers. And we're already the largest institutional investor in this region. But we will be doing that for sure. And with this new EU investment plan in which we will take part, we'll have an opportunity to scale up even further as well. I think one of the biggest challenges going forward, and which I really want EBRD to make a big contribution to, is the accession process of both Albania and North Macedonia. So our intent is to work with Commissioner Vaheli's team and himself on an MOU between those two countries in EBRD on how we will support them through the accession process, both with investment and with policy support as well. So I think there's a real sudden leap of momentum now, actually, because of political decisions the Commissioner really brought about, and also now the opportunities because of the health crisis and economic impact. And we must seize that opportunity.
So thank you very much for that. That is, of course, a very good message. I'd like to focus a little bit on this issue of the recovery, because all the measures that we're taking now, and probably for maybe the year to come, 1 year ahead, will be measures of sustaining the economies rather than ensuring the recovery. This COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, the effects of it will be with us for some time. And I would like to ask both how your respective institutions, the EU, but also the EBRD, are going to commit themselves to help the region beyond the pandemic, because the cost of that will be with us for some time. But then we come also to important other constraints. And Commissioner, if I can return to you for a minute and ask you the question, there are maybe decisions that are being taken in certainly with some of the West Balkan partners as a result of the COVID-19 context that may be eroding some of the democratic institutions, and if I may call it more governance institutions. They are important in the context of the EU, but also the BRD involvement, how much we promote good governance on all aspects of it. How much do you think the EU will be able to involve itself if that process is not reversed?
Well, I think it's the other way around, because these countries have shown now that they continue to be interested in joining the EU, and they continue to design their future as future members of this community. So it means, of course, a stronger commitment when it comes to the governance structures, the functioning of the democratic institutions, the fundamental rights. All this, of course, requires on their side delivery. And this has never been up for discussion because this is the very fundamental of anyone becoming an EU member state. So I don't think that there is any doubt about that in the region. On the contrary, what I see is that everybody understood that message. If you look at the declaration that has been signed off by the EU member states and the Western Balkan countries last week at leaders level, this is more than confirmed in there. Now, when it comes to the recovery, the design of the recovery, then of course we have two sets of challenges. First challenge is that we need to see what impact the crisis will have. It's still too early to tell, but we see already some parallels with our own member states, like, for instance, tourism as one of the hardest hit sector. As President Chakrabarti also already pointed out, in very many of these countries in the Western Balkans, this is a sector which is a big contributor to GDP, which also means that they have vulnerabilities, which also means that we have to look into the structure of their economy. For the rest, I do agree with the President that these countries financially are well managed. This is why the crisis response in these countries were quite efficient. And the crisis response was efficient because help arrived just right on time to help them to fight the health crisis. Now we need to synchronize our efforts when it comes to the recovery. But they also have challenges which they had before the crisis. And these are the very basics that are necessary for any economy to develop. We're talking about connectivity. We're talking about the lack of physical infrastructure in the region and in connection with the EU. So roads, rails, but also energy. They have a vast challenge when it comes to their energy system. Their energy system is a limitation on economic development because of the scarce energy resources that they have, but also because of the nature of their energy system, which is still based on coal, provoking major health risks and environmental risks. But we also see the need to strengthen social part of society, which should also help us to build a resilient economy, for instance, by having a much more modern and more market-oriented education system, an education system that does away with the big skills mismatch which we see in this region. And we need to continue to develop their health system so that if there's another crisis of this kind, then we can fight that crisis together with them. So coming back to your question, what I think is that the recovery strategy that we will put on the table towards the autumn for them will be focused on strengthening both the economic institutions, but also the governance institutions, as this is also part of the enlargement strategy.
But can I perhaps ask, and I see also that a number of our audience are asking the question, this issue of the governance. A number of people in our audience are not convinced about the quality of the governance being what it ought to be. Do you envisage, Commissioner, the involvement of the EU ever in the future, certainly in the context of the recovery, being conditioned on improvements in the quality of the governance?
It is already conditioned because, as you know, in the enlargement process, for those countries who are negotiating, fundamentals first principle is a very strong one, which means that they will and they continue to have to deliver on those. It's not enough to take over EU legislation. It is also a matter of implementation. We're looking at that. So my assessment is that this has already been a condition, and this will continue to be a condition.
Thank you. And President Chakrabarti, if I may come to you and ask your view on the relationship between the BRD involvements and actually the quality of governance across the spectrum of countries that you're investing, and how do you see that?
Well, governance matters. I mean, EBRD is about private sector development. Ultimately, that's why we were set up, to try and help create market economies. And for the private sector to flourish, good governance is a requirement. But EBRD offers advice in those areas where EBRD has strong knowledge. So the areas where the private sector really has an interest in EBRD taking forward the arguments are things like, for example, open tendering procedures to make sure that these are run properly. So e-procurement is something we will be pushing very hard and have done in a number of places. Another area would be sort of the investment climate type discussion. So investment councils that we have set up in these countries with the governments, with the private sector, they give free and frank advice to governments on what they need to do to improve the investment climate if they want to support domestic investors, but also attract more foreign investors. That's another area of governance that's very important. And thirdly, rule of law. EBRD has a long tradition called legal transition, where we have been pushing, particularly in some areas, to get better and more effective justice sectors. I would highlight, for example, first, the way judges are chosen, very, very important. I think here Albania, the reforms Albania took are really important part of the process of accession as well. But on top of that, if you're in the private sector, you want to make sure that the court system operates in a neutral, transparent way, objective way to resolve disputes. So the commercial court system, the dispute resolution system is going to be really, really important. So those are aspects of governance where EBRD has something to say based on our experience, and governments tend to want to hear what we want to say about that. I think that's going to be a very big important part, not just in the Western Balkans, I would say throughout the neighborhood on all those factors. But governance goes wider than just, if you like, government. and goes wider than systems of government, if you like. It also goes to corporate governance. You know, this isn't just about governments improving, it's also about private sector corporate governance improving, because the companies from the regions in the neighborhood need also to be able to be fit and healthy and respected in terms of their economic engagement, commercial engagement outside of their countries as well, within the wider region. That's something that we focus on a lot through either equity stakes in these companies or through our lending to try and improve their governance too. So it's important at all levels that we think about governance and not just only about central government. You know, municipal government is another angle. State-owned enterprises, their corporate governance, another angle. All of those things EBRD does push on very hard. And again, you cannot do this alone. We do this with the Commission, with the World Bank and others who really have a strong influence on these issues, with the IMF, quite often through IMF programs as well. So it is actually, you need the whole system to push in this direction together. And in the accession process, this is fundamental. As Oliver says, it's written into the whole process of enlargement, how you get to it. Has to improve, has to have improved governance. So I think we're pushing it really together on this.
I realize that we've discussed a lot about the Western Balkans, but of course there's broader regions. I mean, in the very last minutes that we have, can I also have your quick thoughts on the assessment of the COVID-19 crisis in the MENA region? And you know, what would be the focus of your support there? Very briefly, because I think the neighborhood is broader than just the Balkans. Commissioner, if I may start with you, your thoughts on EU's involvement in the MENA region?
Well, there again, we have been quite active, but there the challenges are different country by country. If I want to group them, I would say we had a challenge in Lebanon and Jordan, quite similar, which had to do with the macro-financial situation, which has already been difficult before the crisis hit. And these are the two countries that are hosting a large number of Syrian refugees, which became an even bigger challenge for them. And this is why we have been redeploying a significant amount of money when it comes to the bilateral and multilateral support programs. We are talking about 86 million euros, for instance, in relation to Lebanon. And this is why we have also provided macro-financial assistance to both countries. We continue to observe the situation on the ground, but as I said, because of the refugee crisis in the region, this is a very delicate two cases that we need to take care of. If I look at the Maghreb, what I have been striving to do is to deliver help very quickly to Tunisia, who have had also a very difficult macro-financial situation there. Together with the IMF, we have been acting quickly, so we have managed to bring help there, and we had. Because of the lack of absorption, we had available funds which we could redeploy for them. We did a redeployment of 450 million euros from Morocco as well, a key partner in the region. I would say a model to follow by the others as well. And we have been successful to reach out to Algeria, where financial support is also about to arrive these days. We are in the business of helping Egypt as well. We're looking at possibilities to redeploy financial support that we had for them. So we're very active in the southern neighborhood as well.
Thank you. And President Chakrabarti, your thoughts on the MENA region?
Yeah, I mean, we're in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon, and West Bank and Gaza, and we're hoping to invest some 2.3 billion euros in these countries this year. Over half of that's going to be for crisis response, the other half for recovery. And we start with, discussions that we've had already with the prime ministers of Jordan, Egypt, and Morocco. I've talked to them already, and also Tunisia to come. But the first thing we're doing is liquidity for the private sector, and vital infrastructure too. So in Egypt, to give you an example, and the same in Morocco, we put in a lot of liquidity through the local banking system to try and keep the SME and corporate sector alive through this crisis. That's been fundamental. Then we're also trying to help with trade facilitation, trade finance programs, because they have been quite hit on the trade side because of the disruption to global supply chains as well. But beyond that, one of the interesting issues that's happening in this region, and we see it in one or two other countries as well in the neighborhood, wider neighborhood, is this whole issue of state enterprise, particularly in the utility sector, like state electricity companies, for example, being unable to collect the revenue side because people cannot pay their bills at the moment, because they're all, companies and others are having liquidity problems themselves. So we are therefore also trying to work with the Tunisian, the Jordanian state-owned companies in the electricity sector to try and make sure they have enough financing. This is the vital infrastructure support program I mentioned, to get through this as well. And then we're also providing advisory support here, thanks to the EU for its initiative on financial inclusion. We're actually providing a lot of online training for businesses. And here, particularly, I would say women-led businesses who tend to have more difficulty getting access to finance anyway, in a general situation, but also now even more so. So that's quite important to give them the advisory support so they can get through this crisis as well. So there's a wide range of things, but a huge amount of investment going on in this region for us as well.
No, thank you very much. And I appreciate that when we talk about the MENA region, we're not talking about the one thing. There's a really very different countries that require very different challenges, as both you and the Commissioner have said. I am very much aware of the fact that we have now exceeded the time that you have allocated to us, and my apologies for that. Just the one last thought from you on, you're both quite optimistic in the opportunity that we have ahead of us. And on the need for international cooperation. Any last thought you would like to give us on how to sustain international cooperation in view of such a gigantic challenge ahead of us? President, may I start from you?
Sure. Well, I think for me, cooperation starts at home, and the EU. I've always said the EBRD is a global institution with a European heart. I think it's extremely important the EU not only coordinates well within itself and with institutions like EBRD, but the EU becomes a bridge for better cooperation with the wider world as well. And I think that's really, really important to make sure the other multilaterals, but other big players like the United States and others take part in this global cooperation. I think there are 3 or 4 quick things I want to say, though, in terms of what should that cooperation, that strategy for the future be about. One is to make sure the focus on climate, on the green agenda that has been the hallmark of this new commission, is absolutely maintained and just transition with it. We really have to do that together. So tilting to green in our operations, you will see more and more of that in EBRD. Second area I would say is the whole question of inequality. I do worry in a crisis like this that the gains that we made with more women, young people entering the labor force, running businesses, owning businesses, you always worry in a recession that it's a last in, first out problem. And so a real issue of inclusion, tackling inequality, making sure we go forward on that is important. The third area is technology. Here we are, we're having the future of work has arrived before we were ready for it, perhaps. But we're adapting. So I think technology is going to have to be a big thing about and digital skills within that, very important as well to really emphasize. And the fourth thing is the governance angle. Better governance, more resilience because of better governance is going to be fundamental for all that we do. And I think you'll see those 4 themes in EBRD's next 5-year strategy, which I hope our shareholders will approve in October this year at our annual meeting.
Thank you very much for these messages. And Commissioner, can I have your final thoughts on how to promote international cooperation?
My reading, as we go ahead in the crisis, and hopefully we're reaching the end of it, is that international cooperation comes out stronger from this crisis. What the crisis has shown to us, if I look at any of the neighborhoods that belong to my portfolio, what I see is that our level of cooperation only increased. And if I want to take an example, it increased also within these regions. Take a look at the Western Balkans. We have green lanes established on our own green lanes, ensuring the free flow of goods, something that we have not seen even before the crisis in the regions. I think it has created the right atmosphere to strengthen cooperation, international cooperation. The biggest challenge is resilience. I agree with the president. And we need to ensure resilience in our neighborhood when it comes to the economy, when it comes to the society, and also when it comes to their financial resilience. And this is what we will need to work on together with our partners.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your messages. And again, and also thank you for being quite so generous with your time. I think the issue of international cooperation will remain with us, of course, and we'll hear more of it in the times to come. But I'm afraid for today, this is all we have time for. Again, Commissioner, President, thank you very much for joining us and for helping us understand some of the challenges that we have ahead. We hope to host you in some other event in the future, and we welcome very much your thoughts on how to sustain international cooperation. Thank you very much and see you soon, I hope. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you very much.